Thank you for joining us. Welcome. Welcome, especially those folks who are joining us from different time zones. On the West Coast, it's 6:30, but I know Dr. Acosta and many of you are coming from the East Coast and it's 9:30 there. I appreciate you being here. The Center for Child and Family Wellbeing is really excited and thrilled to be hosting Dr. Angel Acosta's lecture this evening as part of our lecture series. I'm Liliana Lengua. I'm the director of the University of Washington Center for Child and Family Wellbeing, and our center supports the well-being and positive development of children and youth by promoting well-being and social emotional skillfulness in the adults in their lives and in the communities that surround them. Our lecture series is one of the ways we share evidence-based information and practices to support child, youth, and family well-being. With that in mind, we wanted to share some information about our upcoming lectures. You can see that we have some exciting lectures coming up, focused on community well-being and resilience, and in particularly supporting parents and children in experiencing refugee contexts. And then in the spring, we have a wonderful presentation on trauma-informed community-based mental health. You can find information about our lecture series on our website. You can also join our mailing list there to receive updates about these lectures and other programs. I did want to make a pitch for voting since we're in voting season. One way we can all support child and family well-being is to vote. And in particular, we'd love to see young adults have their voices heard in this election. It's their future, and we want to support them in having a future that they want to see. Yesterday, I heard that only 7% of young adult Washington state voters have turned in their ballots so far in early voting, when other groups have like 40% turned in already. So if any of you know any voters who haven't voted yet, especially young voters, please encourage them to vote by Tuesday. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, we have a few logistic issues to cover. First of all, I want to say that my camera makes my shelves and my shirt look purple. And even though purple is University of Washington's color, I'm not that huge of a fan. So they're really brown. I don't know why everything is looking very purple. Bad lighting. Okay, as we get started here, I want you to orient you to your screen. At the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. And we ask that if you have questions for Dr. Acosta, please put them in that Q&A box. We will have time for questions at the end or maybe throughout, but we'll want to see those questions in that box. Also, please type your questions as they come up. That way they're ready to go and queued up for the end of the presentation. Also, you can use the chat to communicate with us any technical issues or concerns that you're having or problems that arise. Our team is monitoring that chat. You can also use it to chat with each other and have a discussion about the presentation. The lecture will be recorded and we'll be sending it out in a few days in a follow-up email. It'll also be posted in our video library. So we encourage you to share the presentation with others. After the lecture, you're also going to receive an email that has a feedback survey, and we really welcome your feedback. It helps us as we plan future programming. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening. Dr. Angel Acosta works to bridge the fields of leadership, social justice, and mindfulness. He completed his doctoral degree at Columbia University, where his research explored healing-centered education as a promising framework for educational leadership development and community care. And that's what he'll be talking with us tonight. As a member of the 400 Years of Inequality Project, he designed the Contemplating 400 Years of Inequality experience to support communities with understanding structural inequality through a mindfulness-based and contemplative approach. He's, after participating in the Mind and Life Institute's Academy for Contemplative Leadership, he has been consulting and developing learning experiences that weave leadership development with conversations about inequality and healing to support educational leaders. Dr. Acosta is a proud first-generation Dominican American graduate of SUNY Plattsburgh, and he's currently the director of the Garrison Institute's fellowship program. He also serves as the creative director of the New York City Healing Collective, a community initiative curating work and insights at the intersection of healing, wellness, and societal transformation. If we were in person, I would ask you to please join me with a round of applause in welcoming Dr. Acosta, and I'll provide that round of applause. Thank you, Dr. Acosta, for being here tonight. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Liliana. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
I appreciate the digital clap and the digital claps. I accept digital claps and the snaps as well. So those of you who are watching now and also asynchronously later on, I invite you to clap and to snap. You know, my name is Dr. Angel Acosta. I appreciated Liliana checking in with me to see how I want it to be pronounced. Is it Angel? Is it Angel? Is it Angel? How the French say. I do come from Dominican Republic. Spanish is my first language. So I go by all three. Angel, Angel, Angel Acosta, Angel Acosta. So just wanted to appreciate my name and also being asked how I wanted my name to be pronounced. I'm excited for this evening. And I want to begin by saying that it is deep in the evening on my end. I'm in the East Coast, so it's about 9:38 right now. I am in my office, obviously, but I have my 16-month-old son who is sleeping nearby. So I'm present to him. I want to acknowledge him, my wife, and my family. And I'm just really honored to be invited to give this talk and this lecture. I'm beginning to kind of move into almost like a contemplative space as I prepare to share my remarks. And I want to invite you to relax. I want to invite you to find some ease in your body. I want to invite you to find the most comfortable position for you to take this information in. Yes. It's giving you some space, giving me some space. It's been a long day. So what I want to do today is I want to open up with a couple of questions for us to wrestle with and for you to participate in a dynamic way. So I'll share a link and then I'll also share my screen so that you can contribute to an anonymous survey, anonymous Mentimeter, which you all contribute to. And I invite folks who are watching this talk later to contribute to the survey as well. And then I want to begin by sharing a PowerPoint where I'll kind of walk us through some slides and some theory, some practice, some thinking in the context of healing-centered education. And then I also want to make some acknowledgements around the work that I do and just the space that we're in. So with that, I want to ask for your permission. I want to ask for permission to be able to begin our journey. And I'll ask the team to drop the link in the chat. I want to invite the team to drop the link in the chat. And then I want you all to check out this question. So you can use the link in the chat. You can use the link in the chat. You can also use your phone or open up a browser and put menti.com and use the code up above that's on this page. How are you arriving in this moment? How are you feeling? Tired but good, complete, tired, present, burnt out, grateful, relaxed, anxious, a lot going on, harried but engaged, grateful. At this moment, I'm feeling joy. I'm a bit depressed. I just left a 12-step meeting. So just holding that right there. Slightly frazzled, tired, open, intrigued, relaxed, exhausted, but focused, excited to be here, tired, radically humble, ready to relax. Oh, we can keep going. Heavy but held. Ah, sorrowful. This is a poem. This is a poem. Yeah, a bit distracted thinking about the events of my day. Oh my God, what a day. What a day that we have, didn't we, huh? Yes, rested, ready to hear. So let's go just take a moment just to acknowledge these comments, almost 50 comments, almost 50 feelings, almost 50 sentiments in this space, in this digital room. Imagine if we were together in the same room, we'd be in a restorative circle, just connecting and sharing how we're feeling these array of feelings. Just kind of honoring all of you. I wanna go deeper. I wanna go deeper. Now, I want you to take a moment just to maybe acknowledge one thing in your life that maybe you're holding or carrying. You know, if it's too heavy, maybe don't name it. If you can name something, what are you carrying? What are you holding in your life? And apologies for the typo. What are you holding in your life? What are you carrying? Pressure from parents, carrying grief, resentment, anxiety at work, concern regarding a sick child, appointments for IVF, my daughter who's recovering from infection, a new job, financial debt, anxious about the elections, responsibility for students, some burnout, single mother of 2 children, graduate school, working 2 jobs. And as you read this, and as you hear me read this, I want you to breathe. So often as we read this and take in the emotional economy of a room, of a space, of a community, it can be breathtaking, literally takes your breath away. I want you to breathe fully with me. This is almost like a pre-meditation, a social meditation, a guided meditation of sorts. Just breathe with me as we hold each other in this climate change, worry about my depressed child, the pain of migration, being a migrant, my future, loneliness, ethical dilemmas, responsibilities, aspirations, grief and belief, letting go of too much. So I want you here to just take a deep breath. Just take a simple deep breath. Our collective concern for the state of the world. We're just stepping into this space together. Webinar style, huh? Sharing this digital space. We're here. It might be mediated by these technologies, and maybe there's some distance because of the features. But I feel you, and I hear you, I sense you. Let's go a little deeper. This is the last one, I promise. What's bringing you joy? What's bringing you joy? What's bringing you alegría? ¿Qué te está poniendo contento? What's making you joyful? My daughter, adult children doing well, my family, my housemate making music. Yes, engaging students, right? Ooh, that rich learning that can happen when you are in a flow with a classroom. Rain returning to smoky Washington. Yes, the beauty of changing leaves. Yes, mi mamá, mis hermanas, my sisters, my mother, my dog, my friends, my authentic relationships, my coworkers. I have Friday off. Yes. I wish I had tomorrow off. Appreciation for my health and my family. Yes. My body is healing itself. A haiku in the middle of all these comments. My house plants, nurturing friendships, my comfy chair, creating performance art. Yeah, professionals I respect. So just kind of taking this in, from the fresh, the pizza with fresh garlic to the rain, being in space with me, Dr. Acosta, Abbott Elementary. Oh my God, so funny. Ooh, the puppies. Thank you, puppies. Thank you, puppies. So just kind of giving yourself an opportunity to land in your body after reflecting around how you're arriving. Maybe you were tired, maybe you were fatigued, maybe you were ready to learn. And also noticing what you're carrying, what you're holding. Maybe you were holding some grief, maybe you were holding some anxiousness. And then now just making space for the joy, and noticing how the space for the joy can create a little bit of spaciousness in our heart, in our minds, in our bodies. Yeah. So if it's okay with you, I would like to transition from these questions, closing out with what is bringing you joy, knowing that we all share joys and also have unique joys. I'd like to open up this lecture, this talk, with a deck, a PowerPoint. And I just wanted to make sure that you all can see my deck. I want to invite the...
This looks good.
Yes, thank you. So the promise of healing-centered education. Here we go. And I want to begin by acknowledging a few things. I want to begin by acknowledging a few things, providing some acknowledgements before we start. The first is that you are important, and that's why I checked in with you, seeing how you were arriving, what are you holding, what is bringing you joy. Even though this is a digital space, if I were in person, I would have asked many of you how you're doing, just to begin to build relationship. That's important to me. So I just want to acknowledge all of you who are here, and those of you who are watching asynchronously. I also want to acknowledge one ancestor in particular in my line, my maternal grandmother, Christina Cáceres. She was a giant. She was a giant. She had almost seven children, and almost, oh my God, 20 grandchildren. I have cousins upon cousins upon cousins. Growing up, going to her house, it was incredible. She was a true matriarch, and she passed away in July of this year, and we miss her dearly. And I just want to acknowledge her and her legacy, and continue to work through my grief, and acknowledge that I wouldn't be here without her. Our family wouldn't be here without her. She was the one that decided to move to the United States from Dominican Republic in the 1960s and brought the entire family over across a 2-decade period. Such incredible leadership, and just a beautiful host, and it's an amazing human being. I want to acknowledge her. I also want to acknowledge the territory upon which the University of Washington sits on, the territory stewarded by the Salish people. And I want to not just acknowledge the land as a performative act or move to display a sense of awareness and maybe wokeness, but really to honor the relationships that I'm connected to. I have a colleague who lives in that territory and has taught me a lot about indigenous ways from that area. of this continent. And just want to acknowledge the Salish people, and knowing that Salish means being part of Mother Earth, being part of Mother Earth. So I invite you to just take a moment to reflect on that. How does it feel to be part of Mother Earth? Almost a gift that the Salish people and that Salish can mean that. In their name, they remind us of an essential relationship to this planet and Mother Earth. So thank you for allowing me to acknowledge my grandmother. Thank you for acknowledging me to acknowledge the land. I am on Wappinger, Lenni Lenape land in New York. I acknowledge those wonderful stewards and people. Since I will share more later how I am deeply invested in Indigenous knowledge, part of the deep teachings that I've understood from different communities is, one, the power of acknowledgement, but also the power of reciprocity. I want to begin by sharing some gifts. I want to begin by sharing some gifts and giving back to you for your presence, giving back to the university for this invitation. If you take your phone, if you take a moment and take your phone, you can look at this QR code. You can look at this QR code and go ahead and immediately get access to a meditation series that we put together. It's a 5-part meditation series, and it's wonderful. My colleague Orlando Villarraga produced it, and I just want to gift that to you. I'll have the host of tonight's gathering also put the links in the chat so that you can have it as a link, and then we'll also put these part of the website that'll host this talk, so you can use it and get access to it after in case you lose it. So you can use your phone to access it now or later with the link. Let's keep going. One more gift. So if you use your phone to open up your camera and just literally like point the camera towards the laptop or whatever screen you're on, you can access another resource, which is upcoming events that I have stored for the community, some offerings. So feel free to join us. I also share the link in the chat in a moment. So just know that we're doing work for the community at different offerings in the next couple of months. So I hope those gifts find you well, and just thank you. I want to begin by acknowledging also the fact that we are going through a lot. We're going through a lot as a society. We're going through a lot as a society. It can be really tumultuous time to navigate and go through a pandemic. So I just want to acknowledge all of you who may have lost someone, all of you who may have gotten sick, all of you who may be sick now, just acknowledging just the intensity of living through a global health crisis that's still there. So I just hope you're all doing well, and also acknowledging that we're also handling environmental disruption and environmental difficulty and challenges with climate change, and we're also experiencing political polarization and all kinds of challenges as a collective, and we're also going through individual challenges. Just want to acknowledge all of that. That's all part of our experience. And part of why it's so important to acknowledge all of that and begin with your feelings and what you're carrying and how we're feeling is because part of the HealingCentered Turn is taking seriously the relational aspect of community engagement, of teaching, of classroom management, of consulting with organizations as a healing-centered educator. that is so important to acknowledge the full array of people's experiences in a given context, in a given historical moment. I also want to say that I'm not your traditional academic. I may have the EDD or the doctor before my name, but I don't consider myself a traditional academic. I have been trained and did get my doctorate and I finished my dissertation. But I'd love to share a little bit about how I orient myself differently around the academy and social science, and so that you can have a deeper appreciation for why I do the work I do. And I'll say that through inviting you into the journey of how I became a scholar practitioner. So I'll walk you through my research journey. I'll walk you through my findings and my exploration of some of the major paradigms of healing-centered education. So with that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for about 15, 20 more minutes. So you can take your time really easing into this talk. And I may share some really dense topics and theories and data. But in that density, I want you to know that I will pace myself and we will go through it together. We'll go through it together in a paced way, in a good way. I want to begin by kind of locating historically a particular force in the field of education. By that, I mean a phenomenon that was occurring in the mid-2010s. In the mid-2010s, you could argue that the beginning of 2010, 2015, 2017, there was some interesting movement in different academic spaces, different research communities. This conference was hosted by the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society in 2016, I believe. And it's important to share it for me as a somewhat of a researcher and loose historian of ideas, because it marks a major moment in the exploration of social justice and topics around structural inequality and intersectionality. If you look closely, this idea of the combination of compassion, intersectionality, and justice and challenging time through radicalizing contemplative education. I mean, this is a mouthful, and I don't want us to miss its significance. Before this conference, you may have had communities beginning to ask the question, what is the relationship between mindfulness, contemplative practices, and social justice? Like, what is that relation? What does that look like? For you to appreciate this title, it's important to remind us that for decades, the field of mindfulness, which is very popular now, was growing exponentially. We thank Dr. John Kabat-Zinn for being one of the main scholars to popularize mindfulness-based stress reduction, one of the leading and most famous mindfulness modalities. And then the explosion of different mindfulness practices and approaches in American culture, in the US in particular, to support adults and children and the elderly and soldiers coming from war and all kinds of other communities. So thank you, mindfulness. And then also the wave of and the popularity of yoga and other kind of contemplative and embodiment practices, right? So there's this huge upsurge and focus on mindfulness, yoga, the healing arts to a certain degree. And then at the same time, there was another community that was focused on social justice teachers, activists, community leaders trying to change the violent systems that were reproducing injustice and structural inequality. So thinking very robustly around changing the very system, the prison industrial system, the schools of prison pipeline, racism, sexism, all those systems. So it was very obvious that on the one hand, you had a community that was really close to the work, and in a way burning out. And then on the other hand, you had this community that was engaged in wellness practices and awareness practices. In a way, at times, the critique was trying to escape the very system that the folks in the social justice camp were trying to change. Long story short, what this conference begins to point to is the community of scholars that began to bridge both mindfulness, contemplative practices, embodiment practices, and justice work. You see that? Can you feel that? Can you see that? Can you feel that? Not the splitting of the two, but the combination of understanding justice work as intertwined with mindfulness practice and yoga and other healing arts. So I want to share this. I want to share this as a moment out of many moments. There are many others that I could allude to. And then the cool thing is I actually was part of the committee that put this conference together. I was a very young committee member, just starting my doctorate, and I learned so much from that process. So I got a chance to really be part of that history. Now, let's go a little deeper. So on the one hand, the integration of justice, social justice work, and mindfulness becomes a thing that becomes a robust and a respected approach, the variety of approaches, and the academy, the universities, the scientific community, the social scientific community validates it. Now, I want us to kind of zoom out even more. I want to give you a really rich picture of what we're calling the restorative and healing-centered paradigm. The restorative and healing-centered paradigm. What I mean by that is that there is enough evidence, and I spent 5 years exploring this. So this is what I'm giving you today comes from many years of study, of suffering, and of joy in all kinds of books and texts and resources. What I saw is that there was enough evidence to claim that there was a restorative and healing-centered turn in education. And in this image, I want you to see almost like a braid. A braid. So for example, the rise of restorative justice in the 1960s and 1950s and 70s, the rise of restorative justice as an attempt to approach punishment, to approach school punishment protocol and practices in a restorative way. So for example, as opposed to suspending a student who just fought or sending them to detention, you would create a restorative process whereby every person who was harmed would come to the table and share what went wrong. And then also the person who was considered the perpetrator or the person who maybe inflicted some violence would be invited to not just apologize, but also express where the action came from and why the action was taken. So just kind of really thinking differently about how to engage in punishment and justice work as a response to a society that is obsessed with incarceration, and zero tolerance policies. Very important. So that rise of restorative justice becomes a very important data point. Also, the growth in social emotional learning. Many of you who are scholars or teachers out there know that over the last 20 years, you had this explosion in curriculum, K through 12, and even in adult learning and in the business community. This whole focus on emotional intelligence, on social intelligence. Oh, our children need to be able to process their emotion and label them and be aware of others' emotions and express compassion and kindness, and that people in the business world should do that too. And, one of the classic texts comes out in 1998. Dr. Daniel Goleman writes the book, Emotional Intelligence. He's coming out of Harvard, and he's coming out of the business field as well, and psychology. But that work expands into K through 12 education in the next 20 years. So social emotional learning, very key aspect of this turn. Trauma-informed practices, trauma-informed studies, like understanding how trauma works in the body, understanding how trauma works and impacts the brain and impacts communities. That whole field of understanding just the impact of adverse childhood experiences, oh my God, so rich. And the research that came out of studying soldiers coming from Vietnam and soldiers coming from all kinds of battles and figuring out, oh my God, there's this thing of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Wow. That our understanding of that contributes to this moment, right? To this restorative and healing-centered turn. And in those kind of data sets, that important evidence to show and to prove that there may be a term ahead or we're in one, is this interesting moment we're in with the earth, that we're trying to find kind of equilibrium with Mother Earth because of our clear disruption of ecosystems through our consumption habits, right? So trying to find some equilibrium, recycling, trying to create policies that would curb climate change. That's all a restorative move. It's all a restorative approach to disbalance, to imbalance. And then that, lastly, as I mentioned earlier, the mindfulness movement, not just mindfulness as a practice, but mindfulness and the scientific paradigms that grew to, or the scientific regimes literally that grew to validate the practice. So I just want you to sit with this big idea of a restorative paradigm, and that there's enough evidence to suggest that there is one. And then I want to go a little deeper in the paradigm and suggest also that it's a paradigm, but it's also what some academics might call a turn in academic discourse. So let me situate the paradigm further for you, that the evolution of social and emotional learning and the explosion of mindfulness, and we honor mindfulness also from the tradition that the word comes from, the Buddhist tradition. So we acknowledge that there's a rich connection to Asian countries and Asian communities, trauma-informed teaching and the deep work that came through trauma studies to teach us more about how do we create safe spaces and safe classrooms and safe experiences, restorative justice, indigenous scholarship, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a moment. But we learned so much from indigenous scholars who dared to stay in universities where they were not accepted, who dared to stay at universities who were literally engaging in practices that were dysfunctional. So indigenous scholarship has to be respected in indigenous ontology. And by ontology, it's a fancy word for being, indigenous ways of being, indigenous communities' attempts to survive in a society that oftentimes aim to eliminate them. Think about that. How do you be? How do you exist in a context where your spiritual practices, your cultural habits are oftentimes either erased or difficult to sustain. And then lastly, this idea of the medical, educational, spiritual continuum. You know, I'm channeling my academics, so I had to kind of come a little, dense with it. I had to come a little dense with it. So I want to share a little bit about the medical, educational, spiritual continuum in a moment. So just hold this for me. Just hold it. Breathe with me. And look at the expansive forces and fields that are now like moving together to form this moment where healing centered becomes something that I get invited to talk about. And there are more. And I want to say there are more data sets and more fields that point to a restorative turn. I want to quickly point to some emergent scholarship, just some scholarship that's part of this paradigm, so you can just see the richness of it. There's a lot of scholars writing about healing and researching healing and doing research as a healing process. So looking at the work of Richard Katz, Indigenous Healing Psychology, such a rich text, rich text, looking at many indigenous communities throughout the world and asking what are the common themes around how people not just healed psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, but what are the common practices across human groups that might provide some wisdom in this moment of great uncertainty. The book Hope and Healing in Urban Education. Oh my God, I can nerd out on this all day. This book, Hope and Healing in Urban Education, in 2016, 2017, Dr. John Jenright, he published this. And the reason why it's so significant to acknowledge this text, because it becomes one of the first texts from my vantage point, and I could be wrong, one of the first texts to be published by a major publisher to have front and center the notion of healing in the context of education, in the context of educational policy, practice, and theory. I need you to really hear that this idea of healing prior to the last 10 years could not have been explored in depth formally in educational spaces. And by educational spaces, I mean universities, I mean K through 12 schools. What are you talking about? Healing what? Healing sounds a little woo-woo to me. So that this work here is pointing to the taking seriously notions of healing as a research enterprise, as a design principle in our approach to curriculum development. And then lastly, there are many other texts that I could talk about. I want to acknowledge Sean Wilson and his book, Research is Ceremony, Indigenous Research Methods. This book transformed me. This book transformed me in my approach to research. I mean, could you imagine being a third-year doctoral student, really stressed out, working full-time, taking full-time classes, going at a really reputable university that is making you read almost 5 books a week, write 2-3 papers, and stressing out in regards to my upcoming research. And when I heard that you can carry out research as a ceremony, it just brought a breath of fresh air to me. Such a breath. And I was able to carry out my research in a whole different way. So I want to keep going, just to acknowledge more. So we're going deeper now. We're going deeper into what healing-centered education is. So we acknowledge the fact that it's a phenomenon and it's a paradigm. And then now what is it? Like, what is healing-centered education? Dr. Sean Ginwright uses the term healing-centered engagement in his work, in that text, Hope and Healing in Urban Education. And it's a great concept within the paradigm to start with, because it begins to allow us to think about healing in a broader way. You know, so often we think about healing in a clinical way, right? So healing a disease, healing an ailment. But Sean is one of the first scholars to wrestle with, like, okay, so how do we contend with healing in education and the social realm? Well, part of it is looking at it from a social and political lens, that there are social and political experiences that limit opportunities, that limit people's experiences, that limit people's access to resources, that limit people's capacity to access certain powerful educational experiences. So understand that healing can be social and political, not just clinical. Major point. And that also healing supports educators and those of us who are providing care. So that those of us who are in the front lines caring for people, those of us who are in communities, those of us who are professors, that we also deserve to be held as we're teaching all these beings in our classrooms. Like, who holds us? Who holds us? Who creates a space for our healing, for our support? Healing being culturally grounded, right? And as a way to restore one's identity, right? So that every community has history with healing and restorative practices. And that oftentimes healing is more of a return or a restoration of one's whole self in relationship to one's whole self, all parts of me. You know, it is asset driven and focuses on well-being, right? We also often, when we have a problem, when we're looking at communities, we're focusing on what's wrong with them, what's wrong. Part of taking a healing-centered engagement approach is to look at what's right in people, like what's good. That's why the question, what brings you joy, allows me to end that initial survey from an asset and a well-being perspective. Like, what's bringing us joy? Because it's not all about trauma. And that's key to the healing-centered turn, is that trauma is a force, and it's true, and we experience it at individual, interpersonal, and collective levels. But it's not the only story. We are not just our trauma. So the healing-centered turn, at its clearest moment, breaks away from trauma-informed teaching and trauma-informed care. It breaks away from that field, partly because it doesn't obsess over trauma. It focuses on solutions. It focuses on healing. Now, let me share a little bit about the healing-centered paradigm continuum, and then just a couple more slides, and then we'll talk. We'll have a Q&A. So this is this is a simple thought, and I just want you to kind of think about this in terms of this paradigm, the healing-centered paradigm, that for so long, the notion of healing, the process of healing, our imagination, our collective imagination categorized opportunities for healing in specific ways. On the one hand, healing happens in the medical field, in the medical industry, in hospitals. You know, those who are in charge of caring for the sick have most proximity to healing. And then on the other end, you had healing finding home and finding the opportunity for its manifestation in spiritual communities, in religious institutions, in community spiritual practices, whether it be religious, organized, or not. So for so long, there was this interesting bifurcation or somewhat split of where healing happens, how it happens, who it happens to. And what I want to say is that what's happening now is that education, that the field of education becomes a legitimate site, for healing, for restoration, so that the educational opportunities to engage in healing become a serious part in this continuum. So I wanted just to add that dimension of thinking around this paradigm. And you could even think about like the self-help industry. Thank you, Oprah. The self-help industry, the 12-step programs, like all of that is part of this rich history of our human community and scholarly communities and healthcare practitioners and community and public health experts trying to think about the well-being of communities from different perspectives. And that now we're at this point where they all kind of can be seen as a collective, right when we need them the most, right when there's most crisis, there is a healing-centered paradigm afoot. I want to just briefly share a little bit about my dissertation, and then just give you a touch of the kind of scholarship that I did. And I rarely share this, but I think it's important since we're at the university. And I want you to leave with a rich sense of how robust and how theoretically dense this work can be. So this is the conceptual framework that made up my research study in my doctoral program. I leverage these concepts to engage in a research and a robust study. I brought in healing-centered engagement, right? So culturally grounded, the restoration of identity, tending to the healing of the practitioners, this notion of transformative activist stance, this idea that as a researcher, I'm not neutral. I'm not this external force that's coming into a community and is fully objective, no opinion, has no agenda. I'm just coming to see what's happening and to make claims around what's happening in the context of the theories that I'm exploring. No. I was very clear that as I was entering the setting that I was studying, I had my bias. I had my beliefs, I had my opinions, I had my agenda in terms of really thinking about how healing happens in community, especially educational settings. So this idea of a transformative activist stance is a concept in educational social science that allows you to be what's called strong objectivity, which is naming your biases in such a clear and specific way that you can really come to really pristine and clear observations in terms of the phenomenon you're observing as a scientist. Lastly, I was so taken by indigenous wisdom and indigenous knowledge from indigenous scholars and indigenous communities that I had to ask for permission to use indigenous methodologies. And I did. I found a scholar who I build a rapport with, and I was able to ask, I'm not indigenous, but I like the practices that you use to do research. Can I, may I, could I use them? And this scholar in particular blew my mind. He said, yes, you can use, our ways of doing research. And there is a concept for that, indigenist. So I'm not indigenous, but I take an indigenous stance, meaning that I deeply appreciate the wisdom that comes from indigenous traditions. And I'm able to deploy them in how I make observations, in how I study, and how I research. So being accountable in terms of my relationships to the subjects that I'm studying, my relationship to ideas, my relationship to myself, my relationship to Mother Earth, and then all the relationships that are involved in the research process. and then carrying out my research as a ceremony, as a sacred process, not this cold, objective process of extracting information and extrapolating it to make claims so that I can get my degree, then I can be validated in the field. No. I am in relationship to this process, the people, the context, the space. And I did a traditional research study looking at a small group of teachers in New York City who were participating in a healing-centered education professional development. So for 6 months, I studied this community of about 30 teachers who were going through this curriculum that was supposedly healing-centered. And my job was to assess, like, okay, what is happening? Is healing possible in the context of adult learning and professional development? Oof. In a really big urban, actually one of the largest school districts in the country. And I did participant observation, I did interviews, I did focus group, did document review, and I did a contemplative inquiry. And I wanna close this section here just to show you how healing-centered practices permeate research and permeate social science. So in slowing down, in meditating, in doing contemplative practices to carry out my research, carrying it out as a ceremony, building really good relationships with the subjects and the participants, I was able to find and look close and see how, wow, this wasn't just an educational experience and professional development for teachers and educators in this community. This was literally a process of self-care, a process of healing. There was something about coming together every month for 5-6 hours and checking in and learning together, learning about racism, learning about structural inequality, learning about healing, learning about how to leverage that in the classrooms, in their classrooms. There was this kind of self-care that was happening. And then 2, that they were developing more robust understandings of the systems they were embedded in. They were becoming more aware of the system that they were embedded in, and maybe even the systems that were replicating in their own behavior, from patriarchy to racism to homophobia. And they were developing a more fine-tuned sense of racial literacy, which basically means understanding how racism works at interpersonal, ideological, institutional, and individual levels. And what I saw a healing praxis, a way for people to engage in theorizing and practicing healing. And it was one of the best learning experiences in my life. So that was one of the core findings. And just to show you a little bit of the, this is me after interviewing about 30 subjects. I had extracted some of the most powerful quotes from some of the interviews. I had created categories, and I'm a visual learner, so I would like put them in the floor, and I would literally do contemplative inquiry, which meant that you could meditate with the data. So I would literally sit with the data and almost like build rapport with the ideas that were emerging from it in a really organic and contemplative way. So basically I tied contemplative inquiry, which was me using meditation, using contemplative practices to engage in data analysis. But then I also brought in indigenous ways of understanding. This is a quote from an indigenous scholar saying, "Stories go in circles. They don't go in straight lines. It helps if you listen in circles, because there are stories inside and between stories. And finding your way through them is as easy and as hard as finding your way home. Part of finding is getting lost. And when you are lost, you start to open up and listen." And what I want to invite you to take in is that as I was listening from a contemplative way, in a deep way, I was also listening in circles, listening for relationships. And I would literally, sometimes I would even get in Zazen position in my bench and meditate. I would sometimes build labyrinths, right? So I would put my index cards on the floor with different data sets, and I would walk through the labyrinth in my living room and pick up the data and walk through it and meditate and just kind of see what would come up, what ideas came up, what connections. And so it was just a beautiful process. And so I want to make the connection that all of those paradigms that I mentioned earlier, the social emotional learning, the trauma informed, and the others to constellate the healing centered turn also can be found in academic research, meaning that research can be more of a humanizing process, not this cold, difficult, stressful process that's within this, what some people may call a neoliberal academy or neoliberal university, where there's obsession with publishing and production of new knowledge and new studies, which is important. So I want to take a deep breath there just to remind you that that's how I've come to this point. That's how I've come to this point of having a robust understanding of the healing-centered turn in education, by going through that rich study, by diving into all of those paradigms, and by almost finding a home and finding comfort in all those ideas and having relationships with those ideas and those scholars. So I just wanted to really show you how I've come to this moment and how the healing-centered turn becomes a serious theoretical, practical, and research-oriented framework. Now, I'll close by telling you that when I graduated from my doctorate and I was like, what should I do now? I wanted to extend my work into the community. I wanted to do more healing-centered work. I wanted to really move into the community and bring in the insights from my dissertation. So I created, I've been playing around with this idea of the Acosta Institute, an institute, research hub, fostering innovation at the intersection of healing-centered education, contemplative social science, and slow work. Slow work being a really powerful part of this work. And so I just want to leave you with what we've been doing with the Acosta Institute and healing-centered education. We designed a public course on healing-centered education. So we designed a 3-week experience where people in the public can take an online course and experience healing-centered education, theory, practice, and research. And it's a great kind of primer, one-on-one course. Because my goal was that universities should have healing-centered one-on-one courses. And that's still in the works. So I don't want to wait for a university to tell me teach it. So I taught it to the public. I taught it to the public as a decolonial move, as a radical move, as a fugitive move. I see myself as a fugitive scholar. The grips of the university failed to grab me. I can dance in the institutions, I can speak its language, but I'm hard to catch because my home is in the community. So we built out a course. And I just want to show you the diagram of the container of the course. Because part of being healing-centered is creating as many opportunities for engagement in your classroom or in your community, as many opportunities for clarity, right? So the moment that our students enter the course, we tell them about the course infrastructure, the lectures they'll hear, the live discussions, the social and emotional networking that they'll be engaging in, the practices, the different resources that are available to them in the course, and how we're trying to create a container for them to experience the theories, the practices, the science around healing-centered education. What's not here is that we also have a check-in system. So if anything goes wrong in the class, you hear something that really hurts you, or you engage in dialogue with somebody who says something disrespectful, there was a process of restoration during the course. So just really powerful experience hosting that course. We then designed the healing-centered practicum, which was an opportunity to give people the chance to actually experience healing modalities from elders and community leaders, breath workers, meditation teachers. So not just thinking about healing-centered education as a theoretical exercise, intellectual move, but what does it mean to get in your body and feel healing modalities? So we built out the practicum. And then we launched the first ever HealingCentered Education Summit. HealingCentered Education Summit. We did this with a small team, had about 300 people attend last year, 2021. And the theme was pedagogies for collective recovery. Ooh, it was so rich. We had 25 speakers. Oh my God, it was amazing. I'm still thinking about last year's summit. And you can access my last year's summit on my website. And then we did it again this year. And this year, the theme was play, slow work, and our collective flourishing. And oh my God, it was in October. I am still resonating with this work. My heart opens up every time I think about these two incredible summits, 300 people, 26 speakers, 24 hours of just content. That was just mind-blowing, deep appreciation. And this summit, I actually got sick in the middle of it. So I was grateful to have a team to execute. And then lastly, just deepening my work around understanding the science of what this paradigm is trying to invite us to do, which is slow down. What is mindfulness trying to do? Slow us down. What do contemplative practices try to do? Slow us down. So I'm really interested in this idea of the art and science of slowing down. And I began to teach a course on this. We were teaching a course in December, a short workshop actually, where I kind of share some of the science around peak performance and slowing down and positive psychology and how it relates to just how we can do slow work in our communities and in our jobs. And then I have one last thing to say and I'll shut up and to keep time. Actually, two things. First is thank you. Thank you for listening to all of that. That was my lecture. That was my public lecture at the University of Washington. And I hope that it met your standards and I hope that it met your needs. And if it didn't, that's okay. And if you disagreed with any part of it, that's okay. Hit me up. Let's talk. I love it. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Salish people. Thank you to the hosts of this wonderful gathering. And I close by one last acknowledgement, acknowledging me. This is a picture of me when I was about 2 years old in Dominican Republic, holding my grandfather's hat. My grandfather, his name was Angel Acosta. I get his name. And I see this image as not just an acknowledgement of me, but acknowledging my inner child, acknowledging our inner child, and the fact that the Healing-Centered Turn is really a reminder, a return to play, a return to us, to humanity, to ourselves. And I thank you. Thank you so much. I hold, as the Salish people may say, I hold my hands up to you. I hold my hands up to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Acosta, Angel. Again, if we were in a room, we would be cheering you with a round of applause. So much appreciation for, you use the word connections, but what you've done for us this evening is draw connections as you braided and threaded so many concepts that tend to not get connected for us, and bringing those together for us to think about in a whole. So I appreciate those connections. We have several questions in the Q&A box. So I don't know if you can open that. I do want to say how timely this is, as we know educators have carried such a burden in the last 2 years. And I think about how SEL and mindfulness have become so politicized in educational settings in so many ways. So I appreciate this chance for us to have a conversation about that, about bringing this in educational settings. Do you have the questions in front of you?
Yeah, I do. There's a couple. Does Paulo Freire's pedagogy of oppress also inform this paradigm? What of that work do you think is most relevant and necessary at this pivotal time? Excellent question. Does Paulo Freire, Paulo Freire's work and the work that that was spawned by his work, critical pedagogy, is key to the healing-centered paradigm. So thank you. Thank you. That's what I meant by saying that there are other pieces of evidence in the field that contribute to this paradigm. And Paulo is huge in humanizing education, in the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and creating educational experiences that people can express and experience their agency and learn to read the world and understand the world. So yes, critical theory is a central part of the healing-centered paradigm. And as far as the best parts of critical theory, in terms of that are connected, is critical consciousness, right? So understanding critically what are the systems that are involved and that are causing harm and that need to be replaced, restored, reformed, transformed. And then also the idea of praxis, and like, so thinking and doing, theorizing, and from the thinking and the doing. So very important parts of critical theory and so much more. So it's just a great question. Dr. Bettina Love informs us that schools and the field of education is anchored in white supremacy and anti-Blackness, and in fact, spirit murders dark children. So yes, so that in a school, in a society that was such a history of racism and white supremacy, that oftentimes the experiences of Black children and children of color is just difficult to navigate these school experiences. And Dr. Bettina Love has this concept of spirit murdering, meaning that the children go to schools that oftentimes like really dampen and in her case, they can murder their spirits. So that's why there's been culturally responsive education, culturally relevant education, culturally relevant and sustaining and responsive education. Those are more data sets in the restorative and healing-centered turn. Multicultural education is another evidence. All of those are pieces of evidence that we are trying to restore the curriculum, right? How do educators, schools truly help dark children, children of color heal, given racist nature of schools? Is healing even possible in anti-Black spaces like schools, where majority of teachers are Black? I just got to read that and acknowledge the prophetic question. And just to those of you who might not know, this is just a reality in our country, that the teaching profession is composed of 80 to 80% white folks are mostly the teachers. And then oftentimes in small pockets, and especially in urban places, you have 70% students of color and a whole white teaching staff. And there's just a cultural mismatch often. And there's just miscommunication and oftentimes even anti-Blackness, right? So how can children heal when the people who are teaching them can't really see them for who they are, right? And here I bring the work of Dr. Chris Emdin. He has a wonderful book. That's a whole, that book is my response to your question, is for white folks who teach in the hood, that there is a way for two things to happen. One, for white folks to get a deep education in how to engage in culturally responsive practices in the classroom. And then what some people might call reality pedagogy. So really understanding the children and building a curriculum based on who they are and where they come from, as opposed to imposing a white normative curriculum, right? So there's that move. And then there's also the fact that, we can carve out spaces for our children of color to be educated elsewhere. That's also an option. And then you can do that through alternative schools. And you could also do that through out of school time. What some people may call third spaces. It's a whole rich literature called third spatial analysis and third spatial theory. Ooh, I could talk all day about that, but I digress. But yes, very difficult conundrum of how can we really engage in healing when the very institutions that we're embedding in might not be conducive. And I'll add one last thing, that as a quote unquote fugitive scholar, I'm oftentimes in institutions that weren't built for me. I'm oftentimes navigating organizations that may be, in some way reinforcing white supremacy. What do I do, right? Is this a space I can't heal in or do my work? I craft relationships and bonds within these spaces that allow me to engage in almost like what's called fugitive learning. So from the inside of the organization, just try to figure out a way to craft community to sustain me, sustain the people in it. So just a complex answer to that beautiful question.
Can I jump in with a question that you're
Yeah.
making me think about? It was an earlier question. The person felt that it was answered for them, but when I think about, I love your fugitive model, and you said you created a program for opportunities for learning this. But the question was about pre-professional learning. How do you see these important approaches being incorporated in teacher, educator training at the pre-professional level? And do you see how we're going to bring this to them? And I think also about Sean Ginwright's point about teacher healing. So putting those together, teachers having the opportunity in their pre-professional setting, in their education training, learn this, to incorporate this, and for their own healing.
Well, I'll clarify something. So I want to clarify that we created educational experiences to explore healing-centered education and a healing-centered course for people in the public, which includes teachers, which include pre-teachers, which include, pre-service teachers and also consultants. The fugitive part, just to be clear, fugitive part is an orientation, is an ethical compass, is a way of being in relation to the fact that I've navigated institutions, formal ones, that many of them replicated violence, and have complex histories, right? So they're just not perfect. And that even though you can be in the institutions and also kind of create opportunities to resist them while in them, or just get out of them. So for example, the Acosta Institute is an attempt to build my own institution, period, and not necessarily be tethered to one. I'll dance in a few, I'll move through a couple. So that's fugitive. So I just want to be clear there. But yeah, sister, I think that, it's needed and it's happening. I know all kinds of consultants and teachers and educators and professors who are really moving this paradigm and are teaching pre-service education. I teach at a certificate program at Columbia, and my module is on healing-centered education. So yes, very important to give teachers a base in this work, and just know that this is kind of new to a certain degree. It's kind of new. We're now beginning to talk about what does a healing-centered school district look like. New York City is a great example. They tried to create healing-centered school districts within the DOE. They had this beautiful thing called healing-centered parent ambassadors. Ooh, they trained about 50 parents to understand healing-centered engagement and go off into schools and into communities, right? But oftentimes, financial support for programs like that is limited. So I feel like the program is still kind of working its way to legitimacy.
Yeah, that's great. There are still also a couple other questions, a lot around what are the pathways. We're developing an undergraduate pathway, low-hanging fruit. What are the opportunities there?
Yeah, again, undergraduate pathways in terms of creating entry-level courses where people can explore the healing-centered paradigm, within schools of education or within general education requirements. That's an interesting move. That's been one of the moves that universities have leveled when it came to skills that they felt that the larger population would need. Right. So like the last 15 years, organizations of higher education institutions mandating that we include social justice as part of the general education curriculum. That's a sign. In terms of deeper undergraduate experience, more internships with organizations that are beginning to, use that kind of language, you know, you're beginning to see more and more of that work. So, you know, for university centers like yours, building rapport with, for example, the Healing Schools Project in New York City, Dr. Wanimo, you know, she's doing great work. She's always looking for help, right? So creating pipelines for students. And then also students that are undergraduate and are trying to be teachers or be in the field of education, giving them a more expansive understanding of where they can locate themselves in education.
Mhm.
I wouldn't have studied education. Well, I didn't study education in my undergraduate because the track was so narrow in universities. Like, you're going to be a teacher, or you can be a paraprofessional, or you can be, you know, you can put. So I studied anthropology, and then later on, through a circuitous path, became an educational consultant. So where I worked in schools and interface. So what would it mean to actually have majors that align with how education, the field of education is being transformed, with this whole kind of, it's always been there, right? So you've always done PDs for teachers and PDs for school principals and superintendents. It's always, that always been the case. But I don't think we put 2 and 2 together in the educational system, in higher education, that maybe we should support our education students to think more entrepreneurially. That's my
Mhm.
response to the undergraduate question.
Yeah, that's great. There's a question here from Derek Yeh. How would you connect the concept of healing to the concept of reform?
Very rich. I feel like I'm in class, aren't
Yeah.
we? You know, Derek, if I was in dialogue with you, I would ask, reform of what?
Yeah.
Reform of what? I'm assuming, let's say, the reform of the education system, or I'll respond to that first. You know, if I had to be a scholar of sorts, you know, reform, so put back into form, or to change form. I'll use a parallel kind of word: restore. So when we're being restorative, are we putting things back to where they were, restoring an order, restoring back to a certain condition? Or are we orienting, creating a new experience? So I think part of healing, as opposed to reform, is that sometimes reform may replicate the very systems that caused the trauma in the first place. So that approaching healing from a, let's say, a public policy perspective, in terms of policies and reforming policies, it's really important to do the work of really understanding, like, what are our policies going to do? Who are the ones that are most marginal in the communities that these policies are going to be enacted upon? And so I think that the difference is that if we had to distinguish them, which we should, is that the healing is a little more holistic in its approach and implementation. And reform sometimes can be so tethered and close to the system that's trying to reform that it sometimes reproduces parts, the worst of the system that it's trying to change. I don't know, because it's a great question. And if we were in class, we would just talk, and I would actually ask somebody else to contribute.
And Derek clarified that he meant improve. Like, when in reform, he's looking for the improvement. But your point is really interesting. When we're trying to improve what's existing, we maybe are too close. We stay too close to what's there, and not opening up enough to the broader opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question, Derek. I could talk to you all day. I think it's a great paper. I think it's a great article. I think it's a great book, you know.
Well,
I
you
think we're
said
dancing,
something.
but yeah.
No, go ahead. You said something as you were talking, you were saying when the healing becomes the design of the curriculum. It's the core design element of the curriculum. And we could be thinking about that, not just about curriculum, but about education, like where it's not just changing, it's changing the actual design architecture of the system.
Yeah, like what are some of those really big paradigms in the field, right? In terms of curriculum design, what is it? By design, like what is it? Collaboration by design. What, Pat, what he passed away. There's some, you can help me find. Long story short, an offshoot of a really popular educational framework that's used throughout the country, by design something, either collaboration by design or understanding by design, or
Maybe
designing to
someone will throw
understand.
it in the chat. I don't know it.
Hopefully help someone
Yeah.
save me, throw me a lifeline. But healing by design, like what would it mean to approach educational experience? You're a professor and you're thinking about the syllabus, not just as this kind of process to explore whatever the subject matter is, but how do I craft an experience where students can be who they are and what they're experiencing dynamically throughout it, while exploring the subject matter in a way that they can actually take it in, right? So that means not piling on so many readings in 1 week, because you're not going to explore it and you're going to stress everybody out, assigning papers at specific junctures, and, facilitating classroom dialogue where, people are heard and there are multiple ways to participate anonymously, live. So that the healing could be, in thinking about Derek, this question around improvement, we could think about healing more as engagement. And how do we maximize engagement for each learner in a really broad way? I think for me, that's the most powerful thing that I've learned as I go into spaces. In this community, I was invited to give a lecture, right? If I was invited to facilitate a workshop or a restorative circle, it would have been a slightly different experience, right? But from a healing-centered lens, I can give a lecture that is both gentle, it can hold people's imagination, attention, and humanity, right? So how do I do that for a syllabus? How do I do that for, training maybe? So yeah, just thinking about how healing can be alive in your curriculum design across the board is very important.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. I think we're going to close in a second here, but I'll close with reading a little bit of what Lisa Hart wrote. It's so validating to hear you advocate for universities to expand their learning opportunities for new educators to find themselves. There was more to her comment, but we're at time. Yes. And I want to thank you so much for this, really for drawing these connections that are, give us a new paradigm, a new perspective on a healing-centered perspective on education. I'm thinking a lot about that praxis that you talked about and how that engagement can be enhanced in any of our settings, in our clinical settings, in our educational settings, and in the work that we're doing. So not just for educators. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody take good care.
Yeah, I want to remind everyone that this is recorded. You'll be getting a copy and we encourage you to share it. And a survey will be sent out. We'll really appreciate your input. It helps us do our planning and our programming. I want to remind everyone to vote if you haven't already, and encourage you, especially young people, to get out there and vote this year. And again, if we were here, I'd be asking everyone to give another round of applause, thanking you, Angel, for this really inspiring evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Kind.
Have a good evening.
Bye.